Owen Valerius's chat log froze as a mud-caked boot appeared in the funeral parlor's nursery. The boot, caked in thick, wet earth smelling of brine and decay, stood alone on the threadbare rug. No foot inside, just the boot, as if dropped by a phantom. The air hung thick with the scent of dried lilies and damp plaster, undercut by the low, constant drone of bees vibrating through the floorboards. Thick as blood, a physical thrumming against the soles of my boots. I moved forward, the floorboards groaning like old bones under my weight, my breath fogged in the chill. The nursery was a tomb of faded pastels and broken toys. A rocking chair sat empty, its wooden frame splintered at the base. Then I saw it, the doll. Perched on the chair, its porcelain face smooth as river stone, eyes like wet glass reflecting the blood-red sunset bleeding through the grimy window. They were wrong. Not painted, but tuile l'olive with a dull, oily sheen. I took a step closer, the bee's drone intensifying, a high-pitched whine now scraping against my eardrums. The doll's eyes tracked my movement, pupils dilating slightly as I approached. A pressure began building behind my eyes, deep in the sockets, a slow, insistent squeezing like a vice tightening. Not pain, but presency. The air grew colder, the floral scent turning cloying, sickly sweet. I reached out, fingers trembling only slightly to touch the doll's cheek. Its eyes snapped towards my hand, the wet glass surface seeming to drink the light. The pressure behind my eyes flared, a sharp, metallic ache. I jerked back. My pant leg caught on the jagged edge of a broken mirror leaning against the wall. It was a shard, maybe from a vanity, its silver backing tarnished black. I stumbled, the rough wood scraping my skin, and felt a sudden searing sting on my palm. I looked down. A thin line of blood welled, dark against the pale skin. But when I glanced at the mirror shard, the reflection showed only the doll's eyes staring back, wider now, filled with a crackling static that made the wet glass eyes pulse. The blood on my hand was there, real, but the reflection showed no wound, just those static-filled eyes. The doll's gaze fixed on the spot where my cut should be. The bee's drone dropped to a guttural, metallic buzz, resonating in my teeth. I wrenched my hand back, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The pressure behind my eyes intensified, a white-hot spike. I turned away from the mirror, the nursery spinning. My foot caught on something else, a loose floorboard, half-rotted. I stumbled forward, my hand slamming against the cold, dusty surface of the rocking chair. The doll's eyes seemed to lean towards me, the static in their depths flaring brighter. The air itself felt thick, viscous, resisting my movement. The blood on my palm dripped onto the floor, a single dark bead. I watched it fall. The reflection in the broken mirror didn't show the drop. It showed the doll's eyes, now superimposed over my own, the static of violent black and white storm. The chat log on my wrist-mounted screen flickered violently, the text dissolving into digital snow. Then, clear as a struck bell, the words formed in the static. They see the cut. The screen went dark. The bee's drone ceased abruptly, leaving only the heavy, suffocating silence of the nursery, and the wet, glassy stare of the doll fixed on the spot where my cut had been. The cut on my palm throbbed, a dull, insistent pulse like the slow bleed of a clock's hands. I pressed the wound to my mouth, the salt of my breath mixing with the metallic tang of blood. The taste was wrong, too thick, too alive, like the syrup left in a half-empty bottle of cough medicine. When I pulled away, the wetness on my lips glistened under the sickly glow of the nursery's window, the blood-red sunset smearing across the glass like a bruise. I wiped my palm against my thigh, the fabric rough with old grime, and watched the crimson smear spread in jagged lines, dark as the veins beneath the porcelain skin of the doll. No reflection in the window, just my own face hollowed out by the light, eyes too wide, pupils swallowing the dim. The bees were louder now, a wet, metallic shh that vibrated through the floorboards, syncing with the creak of my boots. Each step was a protest, the wood groaning like a man waking from a nightmare. I turned my head, tracking the sound. It wasn't just in my ears. The air itself twin-pulsed, with it the drone wrapping around my neck, squeezing. My fingers twitched. The doll's eyes were still there, fixed on the space where my cut had been. I flexed my hand. No wound. No blood, just the doll's wet glass stare unblinking. The quilt hung crookedly over the locked door at the far end of the nursery, its stitches a tangled web of black and rust. I didn't remember seeing it before. The fabric was heavy, the weight of it dragging at the air like a drowned man's coat. Threads of gold and crimson wove through the seams my hands, small and trembling, reaching for a child in the water, the waves swallowing her whole, my own face, older now, twisted in grief. The needlework was too precise, the details too accurate. The child's eyes were the doll's eyes. Watching the bee's buzz sharpened into a knife's edge, cutting through the silence as I stepped closer. The quilt shifted. A shadow darted past the curtain, but when I looked, there was nothing. Just the fabric taut as a drum, the threads humming with a low electrical charge. My fingers hovered over the quilt's edge. The thread was cold, almost 20 wet. Like a spider's silk, I pulled. The fabric resisted, then gave way with a wet when schlick feedy. The stitches unraveling slightly, the threads clinging to my skin. The quilt's weight dragged me forward, the door's lock clicking like a dry bone snapping. The bee's drone became a roar, a swarm of wings pressing against my eardrums. The reflection in the glass doors of the funeral parlor twisted. My face split down the middle, the left half dissolving into the doll's eyes, the right half staring back with my own. The stitches in the quilt tightened, pulling my hand toward the door. The thread wrapped around my wrist, cold and slick as an eel's skin. I yanked back, but the quilt didn't let go. The door creaked open, the hinges groaning like a dying man. The thread pulled tighter, my fingers numb against the rough fabric. The doll's eyes in the reflection were now Omen, the wet glass surface of its pupils swallowing the light whole. The bee's buzz was a physical force now, pressing against my chest, my lungs. The quilt's thread burned against my skin, not with heat, but with treasure, a slow, crushing squeeze. I stumbled forward, the door swallowing me whole, the thread still coiled around my wrist, dragging me into the dark. The quilt's threads were not thread at all. They were sivancey, dark and glistening, pulsing with a slow, sickly rhythm like the heartbeat of something drowned. My fingers hovered over the fabric again, the air thick with the scent of salt and rust, the kind of stench that clings to the inside of an old lighthouse when the tide rolls in too high. The stitching along the edges of the quilt's seams was not stitching. It was sandy flesh, stitched back together after a wound too deep to heal. The child in the water was me, but not me. My face, younger, smaller, eyes wide with something worse than fear. Something unrecognizable. The lighthouse beam was a blackened stump, a wound in the sky. The glass long since shattered, the light extinguished forever. The pressure behind my eyes was no longer a drill. It was a fruity pressy, a vice clamping down, the edges of my vision blurring into the wet, glassy stare of the doll's eyes. I exhaled, and the breath came out in a ragged, footy HSSI, like the hiss of steam from a broken pipe. The quilt shifted again, the fabric alive under my touch, the threads on breathing. I traced one with my fingertip. It was cold, slick, wrong. The bee's hum sharpened into a needle's screech, a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. The thread twitched under my skin, a muscle spasming in reverse. The rocking chair creaked. I didn't turn. I knew what was there before I saw it. The cat was a swirl of shadows, fur too dark to be fur, too liquid to be solid. It sat on the chair, silent as smoke, watching me with eyes like the doll's, wet, unblinking, unknowing. The chair rocked once, twice, the sound of it a slow, rhythmic creak, like the tide dragging a boat against the pilings. The cat didn't blink. It didn't move. It just watched. What? I swallowed. My throat was dry, the taste of salt and iron clinging to it. The quilt's last scene was me, older now, my hand sewing the cat into the fabric. The needle was a blackened thorn, the thread a rope of shadows. The cat in the quilt was not the cat on the chair. The one in the fabric was smaller, its fur less dense, its eyes less knowing, less alive. I reached out. The thread snapped. The sound was a wet, thin crack, like the snap of a dry bone, and the quilt jerked in my grip. The fabric was no longer fabric, it was stiff and stretched, too tight over something pulsing beneath. The bee's whine became a roar, a storm of wings pressing against my eardrums, my lungs. I stumbled back, the quilt's weight dragging me toward the door. The thread, the twed vein, coiling around my wrist, cold and slick as an eel's skin. The shadow moved behind the curtain. I didn't look. The cat didn't blink. The quilt's last scene was me, sewing it into the fabric, the needle sinking into my own flesh, the thread breathing, as it pulled me under. The pressure behind my eyes was no longer a press. It was a footpull, a force dragging me toward the dark, toward the water, toward the child in the waves, her eyes wide and wet and waiting. The thread burned, not with heat, but with pressure, a slow, crushing squeeze. I yanked my hand back, but the quilt didn't let go. The door creaked open, the hinges groaning like a dying man. The thread coiled tighter, the fabric's weight dragging me forward. The cat's shadow eyes following me into the dark, the bee's roar filling my ears, the child's face in the water, smiling. The thread tightened, not a painful pull, but a deliberate, insistent tug. It wasn't just around my wrist anymore. It traced a path, a cold, slick roadmap across the back of my hand, up my forearm, disappearing beneath the cuff of my flannel shirt. I didn't look back at the quilt. I didn't look back at the cat. I simply followed the thread's direction, a silent, insistent guide. The parlor seemed to shift. The familiar arrangement of mahogany furniture, the dusty portraits of stern-faced ancestors, the faint scent of embalming fluid, all warped, subtly distorted. A blood-red sunset bled through the grimy windows, painting the room in a sickly radioactive glow. The bee's hum, a constant, maddening drone, intensified, vibrating in my teeth. Fizzed rowing oars through viscous fluid. Fizzed, the sound echoed in my skull. I hadn't noticed the door before. It was tucked into the far wall, almost invisible in the gloom, a dark rectangle devoid of ornamentation. The thread led directly to it. I reached for the knob, the metal cold and slick against my skin. Another tug, not aggressive, but encouraging. Beyond the door lay a hallway lined with mirrors. My breath hitched. Not ordinary mirrors, each was framed in tarnished silver, the glass clouded with age, reflecting not the hallway behind me, but variations of me. Younger me, older me, me with a scar I didn't remember getting, me with eyes that held a chilling, unfamiliar intelligence, and in each reflection, clutched in a hand, was one of the antique dolls. Their eyes, those disturbingly realistic eyes, followed my every move. The pressure behind my eyes slammed down. It wasn't a drill anymore. It was a hammer, pounding against my skull, threatening to shatter it. The reflections blurred, the hallway elongated, the dolls seemed to multiply. "Frusi the stitches." The words flickered in the glass, a ghostly script superimposed over my own image. A cold sweat slicked my skin. The cat appeared beside me, its shadow fur rippling, not flowing, but flea-shifting, like oil on water. It sat on the floor, motionless, watching. Its eyes, the same wet, unblinking gaze as the doll's, locked onto mine. The bee's hum became a focused, surgical whine, dissecting the silence. I felt another tug, this one lower on my ankle. I looked down. Threads, fine, almost invisible strands, woven into my skin. They were the same color as the veins in the quilt, the same cold, slick texture. They extended down my leg, disappearing beneath my trousers. I tried to pull them out, but they clung, stubbornly embedded. The pressure in my head intensified. The cat tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement. Its shadow fur coalesced, swirling into a shape, a needle, not a metaphorical needle, a real blackened needle, glinting in the radioactive light. The hallway seemed to contract, the reflections closing in, the doll's eyes boring into me. My vision swam. The words in the mirrors sharpened, became clearer. "See the stitches, they hold you." I stumbled, the thread on my ankle tightening, pulling me forward. The cat didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. It simply watched. The floor beneath me felt wrong, not solid. Like walking on stretched canvas, the reflections warped, the hallway dissolved, and I was falling, tumbling through a kaleidoscope of distorted images. The bees hum, a deafening roar in my ears. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the cat's shadow fur, coalescing, reforming, becoming something else. Something darker. Something twantwaiting. The tug on my ankle was insistent, a subtle command. I didn't resist. Resistance felt pointless. The parlor, the warped reflections, the doll's eyes, eye data points. Anomalies to be processed. The cat moved ahead, a ripple of shadow fur against the blood-red sunset. It wasn't walking. Exactly. More like sovereign sliding, its form coalescing and dissolving with each movement, like ink bleeding into water. The bee's hum intensified, a focused drone that resonated in my teeth, a perfect synchronization with the unsettling rhythm of oars rowing through viscous fluid. "Favrowing oars in?" the phrase echoed, a recurring loop in my consciousness. The floor transitioned from polished mahogany to something, yielding mud, thick, black mud that sucked at my boots with a disconcerting foudre. Each step required a deliberate effort, the threads on my ankle tightening with the exertion. The air grew heavy, saturated with the scent of brine and decay, a metallic tang that coated my tongue. I registered the sensation, categorized it. No immediate threat, just unpleasant. The shoreline loomed, a dark, indistinct line against the apocalyptic sky. The threads led directly to it, pulling me forward with an almost imperceptible force. I focused on the cat, its shadow fur swirling, a constant visual marker in the oppressive gloom. Its eyes, those wet, unblinking orbs, remained fixed on me, a silent, unwavering observation. The hum of the bees amplified, a surgical whine dissecting the silence, each pulse a measured beat against the backdrop of the encroaching darkness. And then I saw it. A boat. Small, weathered, and undeniably unsettling. It rested low in the water, its hull coated in a layer of glistening slime. The seats were bound with the same coarse threads that clung to my skin, a morbid tapestry woven into the very structure of the vessel. I examined the threads. Their texture was unsettling, cold and slick against my fingertips. They felt engineered. Too perfect. Perfect. I leaned closer, peering into the water's surface. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't quite 25. The face was familiar, yet distorted, twisted into a grotesque parody of my own. The eyes were the same, but they held a predatory glint, a chilling intelligence that I didn't recognize. And then I saw them, claws. Razor-sharp obsidian claws extended from the reflected hands, reaching, grasping. The pressure behind my eyes slammed down again, a crushing weight. I blinked, trying to clear the image, but it lingered, a phantom imprint on my vision. The cat paused, its shadow fur expanding, a dark tendril reaching out towards the water, as if testing the boundary between realities. The metallic scent intensified, mingling with the briny odor of the sea, creating a nauseating cocktail that threatened to overwhelm me. I forced myself to breathe, to analyze. The reflection was a distortion, a trick of the light. But the claws, the intelligence, they resonated with a primal unease, a deep-seated fear that defied logical explanation. Fear probability assessment high. The thought formed unbidden, a detached observation in the chaos of my internal monologue. My gaze drifted to the threads binding the boat's seats. They pulsed faintly, a subtle rhythm that mirrored the bees' hum. I reached out, tracing the path of the threads with my finger, feeling their cold, slick texture. They seemed to vibrate, a silent tremor that resonated through my bones. The reflection in the water shifted again, the claws retracting, the predatory glint fading. But the image remained, a lingering echo of something. Other. The tug on my ankle intensified, a firm directive. I stepped into the boat. The wood groaned beneath my weight, a mournful creak that echoed across the water. The cat followed, its shadow fur rippling, a silent sentinel at my side. The oars were there, also bound with the threads. I picked one up, the wood cold and damp in my hand. Initiating propulsion sequence. On the words formed in my mind, a detached command, as I began to row. The wood groaned beneath my weight, a mournful creak that echoed across the water, swallowed by the oppressive stillness. The cat followed, its shadow fur rippling, a silent sentinel at my side. I picked up an oar, the wood cold and damp in my hand. Initiating propulsion sequence. The words formed in my mind, a detached command, as I began to row. The threads bound to the oars felt slick against my skin, a constant, unsettling reminder of their pervasive presence. Each pull was met with a resistance, a subtle drag that seemed to originate not from the water, but from the threads themselves. The bees' hum ceased abruptly, leaving a void in the soundscape that felt more unsettling than any noise. The silence amplified the creak of the oars, the gentle lapping of the water against the hull. I focused on the rhythm, the repetitive motion, attempting to anchor myself to the physical act. If we maintain equilibrium, process data. The thought echoed, a sterile mantra against the rising tide of unease. My gaze drifted to the water's surface. The reflection stared back. It wasn't a clear image, more a distorted mimicry, as if viewed through rippled glass. The face was familiar, undeniably mine, yet subtly wrong. The eyes were the same shade of gray, but they lacked the familiar weariness, replaced by a predatory glint that sent a shiver crawling down my spine. And then I saw them. Claws, razor-sharp, obsidian claws extended from the reflected hands, flexing slowly, deliberately. The pressure behind my eyes slammed down again, a crushing weight. I blinked, fighting the disorientation. The claws remained, a grotesque parody of human anatomy. The cat's shadow fur expanded, a dark tendril reaching out, mirroring the gesture of the reflected hands. It wasn't a threat display, more an observation, a silent acknowledgement of the anomaly. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of brine and something else, something acrid and metallic like old blood. Probability assessment escalating. I tried to row, but the threads tightened, pulling me toward the reflection, a subtle but insistent force. The oars felt heavier, the water more viscous. Each stroke required a conscious effort, a deliberate defiance of the unseen current. The reflection began to move, mimicking my movements, but with a disturbing lag as if trapped in a delayed loop. Its mouth opened, and a sound emerged, not a spoken word, but a distorted echo of my own voice. "You're the experiment." The words resonated in my skull, bypassing my ears entirely. A wave of nausea washed over me, a visceral reaction to the violation. The cat emitted a low, guttural rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Its shadow fur writhed, coalescing into a second silhouette beside my own, a dark mirror image of my own form. The threads binding the boat pulsed, a frantic rhythm that synchronized with the pressure behind my eyes. I felt a connection, a tangible link to the reflection, as if it were an extension of my own being. Penalize, categorize. Do not react. Fudi, the mantra repeated, a desperate attempt to maintain control. The reflection's eyes narrowed, the predatory glint intensifying. It reached out, its clawed hand extending beyond the surface of the water, as if attempting to grasp me. The threads tightened further, pulling me closer, the boat gliding inexorably toward the distorted image. The metallic scent intensified, overwhelming the briny odor of the sea, coating my tongue with a bitter, coppery taste. The pressure behind my eyes became unbearable, a blinding white light threatening to consume me. I squeezed them shut, bracing for the inevitable. The cat let out a piercing hiss, a sound that tore through the silence, a desperate warning. When I opened my eyes, the reflection was closer, its face contorted into a mocking grin. The claws were inches from my own, and then, a new sensation. A tingling in my joints, a subtle vibration that resonated throughout my body. I looked down, and saw it. Thin, almost invisible threads, identical to those binding the boat and the oars, sprouting from my wrists, my ankles, my neck. They were anchoring me, tethering me to the reflection. Data anomaly. Critical system failure. The threads tightened. A subtle but insistent pull. Data anomaly, critical system failure, Shida. The words echoed, a sterile pronouncement against the rising panic. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the touch of the claws, the violation of the reflection. Then, a jarring shift. The pressure behind my eyes receded, the metallic taste vanished, and the threads slackened. I opened them. The reflection was gone. The water was still. The bee's hum returned, not a comforting drone, but a sharp, insistent buzzing that resonated directly within my skull. Soundscape anomaly. Recalibrating. I blinked, disoriented, the rocking of the boat a nauseating reminder of the ordeal. The cat remained, its shadow fur rippling, a silent observer. I rowed, the oars meeting the water with a less resistant pull, but the feeling of being watched lingered, a cold weight on my spine. The shoreline materialized, a dark silhouette against the blood-red sunset. The air tasted of salt and decay, a familiar yet unsettling combination. I beached the boat, the wood scraping against the sand with a dry, mournful sigh. The threads on the oars retracted, disappearing into the wood as if they'd never been there. I stepped onto the shore, the sand cold and damp beneath my boots. Survivability assessment inconclusive. The funeral parlor loomed before me, a gothic monstrosity silhouetted against the dying light. The windows were dark, reflecting the crimson sky like pools of blood. The door creaked open as I approached, a mournful groan that seemed to welcome me into its depths. The scent of embalming fluid and dust permeated the air, heavy and oppressive. Inside, the mirrors were everywhere, reflecting the gloom, multiplying the shadows. Each one held a distorted version of myself, a mocking caricature of my own features, and then I saw it. Scrawled across the surface of the largest mirror, in a delicate tracery of frost, were words. "Face so the innocent." The frost cracked like glass, the sound brittle and unsettling in the oppressive silence. Forged message analysis, cryptic. Potential threat level, elevated high. The bee's buzz intensified, a swarm of needles prickling against my skin. I turned, searching for the source, but saw nothing. The hand-stitched quilt, draped over a nearby chair, shifted. The scenes depicted within seemed to rearrange themselves, the familiar images of pastoral landscapes twisting into something grotesque. Now, the figures weren't tending fields, but hunched over tables, meticulously stitching. Dolls. Each doll possessed disturbingly realistic eyes, staring out with an unsettling emptiness. The cat watched, its shadow fur swirling like smoke. A metallic clang echoed from deeper within the parlor, drawing me forward. I followed the sound, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting. The hallway opened into a room bathed in the harsh glare of surgical lights, and there it was, the cat. Lying on a metal table, its shadow fur expanding, dissipating like smoke to reveal a network of wires and threads attached to its form. Anomaly confirmed. System integration ongoing. The wires pulsed with a faint rhythmic light, synchronized with the buzzing of the bees. The cat's eyes were open, fixed on some unseen point beyond my comprehension. I approached cautiously, the metallic scent of the surgical instrument stinging my nostrils. The quilt scene shifted again, showing the cat meticulously stitching the dolls, its movements precise and deliberate. Hufurtata correlation. Disturbing. My gaze dropped to my own hands. A tingling sensation spread through my joints, a subtle vibration that resonated throughout my body. I looked down and saw them. Thin, almost invisible threads, identical to those binding the cat and the boat, sprouting from my wrists, my ankles, my neck. They were anchoring me, tethering me to something unseen. The pressure behind my eyes returned, a dull ache that threatened to overwhelm me. V system failure, imminent. V. The cat's shadow fur reformed, expanding to encompass my own form, a dark mirror image superimposed upon my own. The bee's buzz reached a fever pitch, a deafening crescendo that drowned out all other sound. The pressure behind my eyes intensified, a throbbing pulse that synchronized with the incessant buzzing. The quilt scene shifted again, faster now, a chaotic slideshow of stitched figures looming over me, needles glinting in the perpetual twilight. The largest mirror shimmered, the distorted reflection of myself seeming to writhe within the glass. It wasn't a reflection anymore. It was a window. A window into those stitched scenes. I saw myself, or a version of myself, hunched over a table, meticulously stitching a doll's vacant eyes. The air in the parlor grew colder, the scent of embalming fluid sharpening into a metallic tang that coated my tongue. Thiffing cognitive dissonance, escalating. The cat's shadow fur pulsed, a viscous ripple across its form, as if the mirror itself were drawing it closer. Then, a scratch, a sharp, brittle sound like ice cracking. I flinched, my gaze snapping to the mirror. A clawed hand identical to my own but twisted into a grotesque parody, raked across the surface, leaving a trail of frost. The frost coalesced, forming words. They sow the innocent. The message pulsed with an eerie luminescence, the letters shimmering like captured fireflies. The bee's buzz reached a fever pitch, a vibrating hum that resonated deep within my bones. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a physical force pressing against my eardrums, threatening to shatter them. The mirror vibrated, the glass trembling under the assault of the sound and the unseen force behind it. System overload, probable. Juani stumbled backward, a gasp escaping my lips. A sharp pain lanced through my leg, a searing heat that bloomed outward. I looked down and saw it. A shard of glass, jagged and glistening, embedded in my calf. It wasn't just glass. The edges glowed with the same sickly green luminescence as the threads binding the cat, the boat, and now, seemingly me. The pattern of the quilt, a labyrinth of stitched lines, was visible beneath the surface of the wound, imprinted upon my flesh. Phybiological anomaly confirmed. The cat's shadow fur thickened, swirling around it like a suffocating shroud. It pressed against the mirror, its form distorting, merging with the reflected image. The reflection wasn't just mirroring the cat anymore, it was Civi reaching out. I felt a coldness spreading through my limbs, a numbing paralysis that stole the strength from my legs. The pressure behind my eyes became unbearable, a blinding white light that threatened to consume me. The buzzing escalated into a deafening crescendo, a shattering wave of sound that ripped through the parlor. The mirror's screen, every single one twined, began to crack. A spiderweb of fractures spread across their surfaces, each crack accompanied by a sharp, brittle footing-K. The air shimmered, distorting the room into a kaleidoscope of fractured reflections. Structural integrity compromised. Then, the glass exploded outward, a shower of glittering shards that rained down around me. The sound was overwhelming, a chaotic symphony of destruction that drowned out all other sensation. The fragments settled on the floor, reflecting the dying light in 1,000 fractured images. And in the largest mirror, amidst the shattered remnants of glass, I saw it. The reflection wasn't of the parlor anymore. It was of a field, bathed in the sickly green light of the quilt. I was there in the reflection, but not Suimai. A version of me stitched into the quilt, my limbs contorted, my face a mask of silent horror. My eyes were vacant, mirroring the emptiness of the dolls. The cat, massive and distorted, loomed over me, its shadow fur swirling like a vortex. It watched, impassive, as the stitched figure of myself was slowly, meticulously, absorbed into the fabric of the quilt. The bee's hum faded, replaced by the rustling of fabric, the whisper of needles. The threads burned like cold wire against my fingers, taut as guitar strings humming beneath the weight of unseen fingers. I yanked my hand back, sharp, metallic, the ends fraying into nothingness. but the rest cling to my wrists, my elbows, my knees, a lattice of black silk mapping my body into something else. The air smells of copper and ozone, the scent of old coins left in a saltwater grave. My breath fogs in the shattered air, each exhale a ghostly fifisee against the glass teeth of the mirrors. The quilt shifts again, the scenes stitching themselves anew. No more distant visions. Now, it's Windy Mai. The cat watches. Its shadow fur ripples like oil on black water, and I realize it's not a cat. It's a recording, a data stream, coiled and waiting, its form flickering between solidity and the static hum of a broken television. The bee's buzz isn't just sound anymore, it's data. A swarm of ones and zeros, a digital scream pressing against my skull. My fingers tremble as I trace the threads. They lead inward toward the largest mirror, the one that still holds its shape despite the cracks. The reflection isn't mine. It's a her version of me standing in the same ruined parlor but older. Hollow-eyed, her fingers wrapped around the antique doll. The doll's glass eyes gleam, wet and reflective like tears caught in a spider's web. The reflection's mouth moves, but no sound comes out. Just a flicker of static, a glitch in the air. Then, the cat's shadow-furred unravels peeling back to reveal rows of binary code, a never-ending scroll of green and black, the data streaming upward like a school of fish, like a school of fin witnesses, the threads on my joints pulse. A pressure builds behind my eyes, not pain or cognition. The doppelganger's reflection turns, her claws elongating black as the inside of a bruise, and I realize she's not a copy. She's the copy for de no lifidi et vifendi. The experiment. The thing that was stitched into the quilt, the thing that was recorded. You're the witness, the cat transmits, its voice a distorted whisper, like a radio tuned between stations. You're the one who was left behind. The reflection's claws extend toward my neck. The air splits open with a sound like tearing silk, and the threads on my skin tighten, pulling me closer to the mirror. The bee's buzz becomes a roar, a digital storm, and the quilt's scenes flash faster. Faster, the claws touch my throat. The last thing I see is the reflection's smile, too wide, too many teeth, and the cat's shadow fur wrapping around my face like a shroud. The data streams swallow me whole. The claws touch my throat, not cold but wet, and like the salt water that choked me as a child. The pressure behind my eyes isn't recognition anymore. It's Sid recalling. The reflection's smile stretches too wide, teeth too sharp, glinting with the same radioactive green as the blood on the glass. Be me, blood, thy me memory. The bee's buzz syncs with my pulse. A digital scream inside my skull, data stream. Witness. Subject. The cat's shadow fur dissolves into static, a sigh like a dying radio then vanishes. The data is complete. The quilt's threads, slick with something that isn't sweat, pull harder, not on my wrists but through them, anchoring me to the mirror. The air tastes of copper and ozone thick enough to choke on. Each breath rasps, a dry shock against the silence that's been screaming all along. I see it now. The antique dolls in the parlor weren't twinto in the quilt. They whumbower the quilt stitches. The reflection's hands holding the doll with glass eyes like wet tears aren't mine. They're Fwendier's. The lighthouse keeper. The Fwend original, the one who was stitched into this nightmare. The threads map my body not as a cage, but as a photomap, leading inward toward the lighthouse. The largest mirror isn't a window. It's a footy door. The blood on the glass isn't dried. It's a glowing, radiating that sickly radioactive decay, casting jagged shadows that ripple like oil on black water. The reflection's eyes lock onto mine, not with malice, with footy pity, or the hollow certainty of someone who's already drowned. You're the witness. The cat's voice echoes in my bones, not in my ears. You're the one who was left behind. Footy. The threads tighten, a cold wire biting into my skin where they pierce the joints of my elbows, my knees. The pressure behind my eyes intensifies, a physical weight pressing my vision inward. I see the lighthouse now, not the ruin but the child I was. Standing on the rocks at dusk, the blood-red sunset bleeding into the sea. The waves are too big, too greedy. I'm small, helpless. The water isn't cold. It's a black, like the inside of a bruise, swallowing me whole. The doll's glass eyes are in the water, reflecting the blood-red sky, fin my eyes into her eyes, the same eyes in the reflection's face. The realization hits like a physical blow. The drowning wasn't an accident. It was the physic experiment, the corruption. The quilt wasn't made 20 of IFE innocence. It was made 20 by, it's stitched with the threads of a child's terror. The reflection's claws retract. The mirror doesn't show my face anymore. It shows the lighthouse door, The one I've guarded for 20 years. The one I've never opened. Its sign locked at the wood grain is smooth, weathered. Waiting, the radioactive glow of the blood on the glass intensifies, casting the door in a sickly pulsing green light. The bee's buzz drops to a low, guttural frunthrum, vibrating in my teeth. The silence is absolute now, heavy as the water that drowned me. The threads pull me forward, not with force, but with the inevitability of a tide. My breath comes in ragged gasps, each fuck to a shush, a tiny rupture in the suffocating quiet. The reflection's mouth moves again silently. Foot go home. The pressure behind my eyes peaks, a white-hot spike of pure crystalline memory. The water's embrace, the cold, black water. The mirror shatters. Not with a crash, but with a sound like 1,000 glass teeth snapping at once. A sharp, crystalline footing crack that echoes in the hollow space where the reflection was. The shards fall like black rain, each piece reflecting the glowing, unlocked door. The radioactive decay light bathes the empty space where the mirror stood, waiting.